The Ice Age world was not kind to those who lived in it. Imagine a vast and endless landscape of white, where snow swallowed the ground, and the air itself seemed to cut like knives against the skin. The sun, already weak and fleeting in these frozen regions, slipped away behind the horizon far too early, and in its absence stretched a night so long it felt eternal. For prehistoric humans, this longest night of the year was not simply a matter of time passing. It was a difference between survival and death. To endure it meant facing a wall of darkness filled with predators, freezing winds, and the constant threat of hunger. To fail was to vanish into the endless winter, just another fragile life extinguished by nature's indifference. The darkness was not only physical but psychological. Humans are creatures of light, instinctively seeking the warmth of the sun. In prehistoric times, when artificial light was nothing more than the flicker of a torch or the glow of a fire, the absence of daylight was overwhelming. Shadows danced along cave walls, turning the imagination against itself. The sound of howling winds outside or the distant roar of predators made the night feel alive with dangers waiting to strike. For a caveman huddled by the fire, every crackle in the brush, every crunch of snow outside could be a wolf, a bear, or something worse. The mind, unprotected by reason in such conditions, filled the void with fear. The longest night was not just an external battle against the elements, but also an inner war against dread, loneliness, and despair. And yet, there was beauty even in this struggle. The night sky, free of modern pollution, would have been a vast dome of glittering stars, brighter than anything we can see today. The moon cast pale light over the icy landscape, giving the world an otherworldly glow. Cavemen who looked upward must have felt small beneath this cosmic stage, but perhaps also connected to something larger than themselves. The heavens above, with their predictable cycles of stars and seasons, offered some reassurance. The night, no matter how long, would always end. The longest night of the year was terrifying, but it was also part of a rhythm that carried life from season to season, winter to spring. For groups of cavemen, this night demanded preparation. Long before it arrived, they would have gathered food, strengthened shelters, and ensured a fire was ready to withstand the hours of cold. But no amount of preparation erased the weight of time. As the night stretched on, every moment became heavier. Sleep was dangerous, for the fire went out while the tribe rested. Cold would seep into their bones and death would follow. Someone always had to watch the flames, feeding them with precious wood or bone. This responsibility carried enormous pressure, for in those embers lay the lives of every man, woman, and child huddled nearby. The fire was not just warmth, it was life itself. The psychological toll of the longest night was immense. Hunger gnawed at bellies, children whimpered in fear, and exhaustion pulled eyelids closed. Yet the knowledge that danger lurked outside kept everyone alert. A single mistake, a forgotten log on the fire, a predator slipping past the camp's defenses, or the collapse of a poorly built shelter, could erase months of effort. In this way, the longest night was a test of vigilance and endurance. It was not just about surviving a span of hours, but about proving humanity's ability to resist extinction in the face of overwhelming odds. The contrast of the night defined its meaning. Warmed inside the cave versus the merciless cold outside. The fragile glow of fire versus the engulfing blackness beyond. The closeness of family huddled together versus the loneliness of the wilderness. These juxtapositions gave the night its drama and shaped the memory of those who endured it. Each successful passage through the longest night meant another chance at life, another day to hunt, to gather, to tell stories, to hope for spring. Each failure meant silence, frozen remains hidden beneath the snow, forgotten by all except the wind. The longest night of the year was, therefore, more than an environmental phenomenon. It was a symbol of everything prehistoric humanity faced, the thin line between survival and extinction. To modern eyes, Accustomed to electric light and heated homes, it is hard to imagine the crushing weight of those hours. But for cavemen, the longest night was the ultimate trial, a reminder of human fragility, and at the same time, proof of resilience. Each year, when the darkness reached its peak, humanity's survival hung by a thread, and yet they endured. In their endurance, they laid the foundation for us, the descendants who can now look back with awe at what it meant to survive the night when the world seemed to freeze forever. When we use the word caveman, it often calls to mind a crude, hunched figure with tangled hair, dragging club, and living without thought beyond the next meal. But reality, as revealed through archaeology and anthropology, is far richer, more complex, and far more human. To understand how our ancestors endured winters and survived the longest nights, we must first know who they truly were. They were not mythical caricatures, but living people, Neanderthals, Homo sapiens, and other hominins, each with intelligence, adaptability, and culture. They laughed, feared, loved, and struggled in ways that bring them closer to us than popular imagination often allows. Neanderthal, for instance, were among the most skilled winter survivors. Shorter and stockier than modern humans, with strong limbs and broad noses, they were built for the cold. Fossil evidence shows that they had brains slightly larger on average than our own species, suggesting sophisticated thought. They created tools with precision, hunted cooperatively, and buried their dead in ritualistic ways. In contrast, early Homo sapiens, our own ancestors, brought different strengths, adaptability, creativity, and long-distance planning. They painted on cave walls, crafted ornaments, and formed complex social networks. These differences hint at why Homo sapiens eventually thrived, while Neanderthals disappeared. But in the context of winter survival, both groups show us just how advanced and capable prehistoric humans really were. The term caveman itself is misleading. Yes, many groups use caves as shelters, especially during the bitter months. But they were not the only form of housing. People built huts out of mammoth bones, covered them with animal hides, and constructed lean-tos and temporary shelters in forests. The cave was a symbol of safety and protection, but it was only one option in a diverse toolkit of survival strategies. Calling all ancient humans cavemen diminishes their ingenuity and reduces them to stereotypes. In truth, they were versatile, inventive, and deeply resourceful, far more than shadows on cave walls. Archaeological discoveries over the past century have rewritten the story of who these people were. In Shanidar Cave in Iraq, researchers found a Neanderthal burial site with traces of pollen, suggesting that flowers may have been placed with the dead. In France and Spain, cave paintings tens of thousands of years old reveal a symbolic world of animals, spirits, and perhaps even myths. Tools unearthed across Europe and Asia show a level of craftsmanship that required foresight, dexterity, and teaching from one generation to the next. These are not the acts of brutes, but of thoughtful, social beings. The evidence suggests not only survival, but also meaning, culture, and identity. Understanding this humanity is essential because it changes how we see the struggle of winter nights. These were not beasts blindly clawing through the snow, but intelligent groups who strategized, planned, and leaned on one another. They shared food, taught children, and passed down knowledge and stories told by firelight. When the longest night fell, they were not only enduring it with fear, but also interpreting it, perhaps even ritualizing it, giving shape to the darkness through belief and imagination. They faced the cold together, as families and tribes bound by the shared purpose of survival. The contrast between stereotype and reality is striking. Popular imagination sees cavemen as primitive, barely above animals. Yet the reality is that they had the beginnings of culture, spirituality, and cooperation that mirror our own societies today. They were fragile, yes, vulnerable to the elements, predators, and disease, but they were also resilient, capable of innovation, and deeply aware of their world. To place them only in caves with clubs in their hands is to deny their true brilliance. As we move deeper into their story, we must carry this perspective forward. Cavemen were not simply surviving. They were shaping the human story. They represent the threshold between vulnerability and dominance, between extinction and endurance. By redefining who they were, we prepare ourselves to understand how they faced the longest night, not as animals in the dark, but as people, human in every sense, struggling to hold on to life as the ice pressed down around them. To understand the daily struggle of cavemen, we must first step into the world they inhabited. The Ice Age was not a single moment, but a series of glacial periods stretching over tens of thousands of years. Vast sheets of ice crawled across continents, swallowing valleys and carving mountains, while tundras and steppe grasslands stretched for hundreds of miles. The environment was brutal and unforgiving. Winters were not measured in weeks, but in months of bone-freezing cold. The air itself carried a sharpness that could bite through fur and skin. Food was scarce. Predators were many, and survival depended entirely on how well humans could adapt to this merciless stage of nature. The landscapes cavemen knew were both awe-inspiring and terrifying. To the north and east lay endless glaciers, walls of ice hundreds of feet tall, gleaming blue and white under the pale light of the sun. Rivers froze solid, forests retreated, and much of Europe and Asia turned into wind-swept plains. These plains, though barren to human eye, supported massive herds of Ice Age animals: mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, bison, reindeer, and wild horses. Yet for every herd that promised food and clothing, there were predators lurking in the shadows: saber-toothed cats, cave lions, dire wolves, and cave bears, all adapted to the cold and just as desperate to survive as humans. The Ice Age world was a delicate balance between predator and prey, where humans often stood in the middle, hunters themselves, but always hunted in return. Winter magnified every challenge. Summer and autumn provided opportunities to gather plants, berries, and nuts, or to hunt in relatively milder conditions. But once the snow set in, the land became silent and still, covered by a thick blanket of white. Plants disappeared, small animals hibernated, and rivers froze, cutting off access to fish. Only the largest animals remained active, but hunting them was a dangerous gamble that required courage, tools, and teamwork. The cold was not just a background setting. It actively reshaped the choices cavemen made. It dictated where they could live, what they could eat, and how they interacted with both nature and each other. The Ice Age climate itself was unpredictable, shifting between freezing storms and rare but brief thaws. A sudden blizzard could trap a hunting party, disorienting them in a white void where visibility was reduced to a few steps. Strong winds carried snow across the plains, erasing tracks and leaving tribes lost in their own homeland. Temperatures dropped so low that exposed skin would freeze within minutes, turning simple mistakes, like losing a fire-starting tool or failing to repair a shelter, into fatal errors. To live in this world was to accept constant uncertainty. Nature was a silent but relentless enemy, punishing the unprepared and sparing only the most adaptable. And yet, the Ice Age world was not only hostile, it was also strangely abundant, though in a form difficult for humans to access. The great herds of mammoths and bison carried thousands of pounds of meat and fur, but catching them meant confronting beasts far larger and stronger than humans. Reindeer migrations offered opportunities for food, but timing was everything. Missed the herds, and starvation followed. Even predators provided opportunities. A lion or wolf carcass left behind offered meat and bone, but scavenging from the remains meant risking confrontation with other hungry animals. In this way, survival was a constant negotiation with the environment, requiring both daring and caution. The contrast of the Ice Age is what made it so testing: abundance in plain sight, but scarcity in human hands, a land rich with resources, but only for those clever and brave enough to seize them. Every element of the environment carried both promise and danger. The same snow that chilled the bone could also preserve meat for months. The same ice that froze rivers solid also created bridges across landscapes. Firewood was scarce in the open plains, yet animal fat could fuel lamps that kept caves lit through the endless night. For every obstacle, there was a potential solution, but it demanded innovation, resilience, and unity. This world shaped humanity itself. The challenges of the Ice Age forced cavemen to think differently, to plan, and to cooperate. Survival was no longer about instinct alone, but about foresight. They learned to anticipate migrations, to craft tools suited for hunting in the snow, to build shelters that resisted the wind. These were not luxuries. They were necessities. The Ice Age carved humanity into problem solvers, embedding adaptability deep into our very nature. For modern humans, it is easy to look at this world from a distance, as though it belonged to another species. But it is our world, too, the crucible in which our ancestors were tested. The Ice Age environment was a relentless teacher, offering no mercy and demanding constant vigilance. For those who survived it, each day was a victory not just for themselves, but for the generations that would follow. The harsh world of ice and snow was both enemy and teacher, shaping humans into the resilient beings who could endure the longest night of the year. For prehistoric humans, nothing symbolized survival more than fire. In a world where ice ruled the land and the night stretched endlessly, fire was not simply a tool, it was life itself. Without it, even the strongest hunter or the best shelter could not protect a tribe from the relentless cold. Fire provided warmth, safety, light, and a sense of hope when the darkness threatened to consume everything. On the longest night of the year, when the cold pressed hardest and predators prowled in the shadows, the flickering glow of flames stood as humanity's most powerful weapon against extinction. The mastery of fire was not automatic. Archaeological evidence shows that early humans likely learned to harness fire from natural sources such as lightning strikes, volcanic activity, or burning forests long before they discovered how to make it themselves. At first, fire was a gift of nature, rare, unpredictable, and desperately precious. Imagine the scene: a bolt of lightning igniting a tree, a small group of humans rushing to capture the burning branches, cradling them carefully, and carrying them back to camp. The fire would be nurtured and guarded, because once it went out, there was no guarantee of another chance. This responsibility gave rise to firekeepers, individuals tasked with tending the flames, ensuring that through wind and snow, the embers never died. The tribe's survival depended on their vigilance. Eventually, humans developed the ability to create fire themselves. Stone tools such as flint and pyrite could strike sparks, igniting dry grass, bark, or animal dung. Later, friction-based techniques, like fire drills and bow drills, would appear. These were not easy methods. Creating fire required patience, skill, and practice. But the breakthrough was monumental. The ability to produce fire on command gave humans power over their environment in a way no other creature possessed. Fire was no longer an accident of nature. It became a controlled force, a shield against the ice, and a constant companion during the longest nights. The practical uses of fire were as diverse as they were essential. It provided warmth, allowing tribes to sleep through the night without freezing. It cooked food, transforming tough meat into something easier to chew and digest, reducing disease from parasites and unlocking more nutrients. It hardened wooden spear tips, making weapons stronger and more durable. Smoke from fire also helped preserve meat and fish, extending food supplies through the hungry months of winter. Fire kept predators at bay. Wolves and lions would hesitate to approach a ring of flames, giving humans a rare advantage in the constant battle for survival. Each spark, each ember, was a shield against forces that otherwise would have overwhelmed fragile bodies in the Ice Age world. But fire was not only physical, it was psychological. The glow of flames pushed back the overwhelming darkness of the night. Inside caves or shelters, shadows danced on the walls, and the firelight created a sense of safety that no other element could provide. Around the fire, people gathered to share food, tell stories, and comfort one another. Children listened to elders recount tales of hunts, spirits, and ancestors. Songs may have been sung, rituals performed, and plans made for the days ahead. In this way, fire became the center of social life, a place where community was strengthened and knowledge passed from one generation to the next. On the coldest nights, it offered not just heat for the body, but warmth for the spirit. The fragility of fire, however, always remained a threat. A sudden gust of wind, a snowstorm, or carelessness could extinguish the flames, plunging the group into darkness and cold. For this reason, fire was treated with reverence. It may have been seen as a living thing, something to be fed and cared for. Archaeological evidence suggests that hearths were often carefully constructed with stones to contain the flames, reflecting both practicality and respect. The fire was not simply fuel and heat. It was a partner in survival. Losing it could mean disaster, but keeping it alive meant another day of life. Fire also marked the dividing line between humans and animals. No other creature of the Ice Age could command flames as humans did. This gave our ancestors a unique advantage, allowing them to expand into harsher regions where no predator could follow. While wolves relied on fur and lions on muscle, humans relied on the flicker of firelight. It transformed caves into homes, tundras into campsites, and long nights into survivable stretches of time. Fire turned the impossible into manageable, opening lands that otherwise would have remained barren and unreachable. In many ways, fire was the first technology that reshaped the destiny of humanity. It was more than survival. It was progress. The use of fire changed diets, expanded lifespans, encouraged social bonds, and laid the foundation for innovation. It was the earliest form of environmental control, proof that humans could shape their world rather than simply endure it. Without fire, there would be no survival through the Ice Age, and perhaps no modern humans at all. It was both a tool and a symbol, a reminder that even in the darkest hours of the longest night, humans could summon light and warmth from their own ingenuity. On the longest night of the year, as winds howled and predators prowled unseen, fire stood as a line between extinction and endurance. It was a small miracle repeated night after night, a fragile but powerful force that turned fear into safety and despair into hope. In its flickering glow, cavemen not only survived the cold, they also began to imagine, to dream, and to believe that their place in the world could be more than mere survival. Fire was survival, but it was also the spark of what would one day become civilization. In the frozen world of the Ice Age, fire alone was not enough. Flames could give warmth and light, but without walls to hold back the bitter wind and a roof to stop the falling snow, even the brightest fire would quickly fade into weakness. For cavemen, shelter was as essential as food or water. It was a barrier between life and death, the line that separated comfort from exposure. In the endless winter nights, the difference between huddling inside a solid shelter and being caught in the open air often determined whether a family would see the next sunrise. Survival required not just fire, but fortresses of warmth, whether found in caves built from bone and hide or shaped from snow and earth. Caves were nature's gift to Ice Age humanity. Carved over millennia by rivers, wind, and stone, they offered ready-made protection from predators and the elements. Inside a cave, the wind was muffled, snow could not reach, and temperatures remained more stable than outside. Archaeological sites across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East reveal evidence of human habitation in caves, ash from hearths, wall paintings, and even burials. Yet caves were not always perfect sanctuaries. They were often shared with dangerous animals such as bears or lions, and competing groups of humans might fight over their safety. To secure a cave meant to secure survival, but it also meant facing rivals and sometimes predators already claiming the space. The cave, though iconic, was not the only answer to cold. Where caves were absent or unsafe, humans built their own homes from the resources around them. In regions rich with mammoths, entire shelters were constructed from bones and tusks, covered with animal hides to keep out the cold. These mammoth bone houses, discovered in Ukraine and Russia, show incredible skill and planning. The bones formed sturdy frames, while the hides acted like insulation, keeping warmth trapped inside. Other groups relied on wood, branches, and sod, layering animal skins across their roofs to keep snow and wind at bay. In tundra landscapes where trees were scarce, ingenuity became essential. People used what they had, from earth dug into pits to blocks of packed snow, forming temporary but life-saving refuges. Inside these shelters, every detail mattered. Fires were carefully placed to provide maximum heat without filling the space with smoke. Ventilation holes or cracks were used to let air flow, preventing suffocation. Sleeping areas were lined with furs and grasses to keep bodies off the frozen ground, reducing heat loss. Families and tribes slept close together, sharing warmth. The shelter was more than a building. It was an ecosystem of survival, where every choice, from the thickness of a hide to the placement of a hearth, contributed to whether the group would endure the longest night. The construction of shelters also reflected cooperation and community. Building a mammoth bone hut or insulating a hide tent required many hands and coordinated effort. Men, women, and children all had roles: collecting materials, sewing hides, arranging stones, or repairing leaks. These projects strengthened social bonds and gave people a shared purpose. Just as the hearth became the center of emotional life, the shelter became the physical heart of survival. It was where food was eaten, stories told, and warmth gathered. Outside was chaos and danger. Inside was order, safety, and the fragile sense of home. But not all shelters were equal, and not every group survived the night. Poorly built structures could collapse under heavy snow or fail to keep out drafts. A fire without proper ventilation could suffocate its keepers. A cave taken over by predators or rival tribes might leave people wandering in the open, searching desperately for another haven. The contrast between safety within and exposure without was absolute. Inside, a family could sleep. Outside, the cold gnawed at flesh and frostbite crept silently across fingers and toes. To shelter was to live. To be unsheltered was to die. Shelters were also places of memory and ritual. In caves across Europe, walls still bear the markings of prehistoric hands. Paintings of animals, handprints, and symbols left thousands of years ago. These were not idle decorations. They may have been acts of storytelling, ritual, or even attempts to give meaning to the space that protected them from the unforgiving night. In this way, the shelter became more than a roof and walls. It became a sacred space, a place where humans could connect to one another and perhaps to something beyond themselves. Within those walls, they were not just surviving the winter, they were shaping the beginnings of culture and identity. The ingenuity of Ice Age shelters shows us how determined and adaptable our ancestors were. They were not content to suffer at the mercy of nature. They studied it, worked with it, and built against it. They used bones, hides, stones, and earth to carve out spaces of warmth and safety in a world designed to freeze them into silence. Each shelter, whether a cave glowing with firelight or a hide tent on the tundra, was a fortress against the cold, a statement of defiance against extinction. On the longest night of the year, when the cold pressed hardest and the darkness outside seemed endless, the shelter stood as humanity's refuge. Inside, flames flickered, families huddled close, and stories wove through the air, creating warmth of another kind. Outside, the wind howled and predators prowled, but within the walls there was hope. The shelter, humble though it may seem, was a triumph of human will and creativity. It was not just a place to sleep. It was a fortress that carried humanity through the endless winter nights and into the future. When winter arrived in the Ice Age, Food became a prize more precious than fire itself. The frozen world stripped away the abundance of warmer seasons. Plants withered, rivers froze, and animals migrated to safer grounds. For cavemen, survival meant turning into hunters of the most dangerous kind, venturing out into a world of darkness, snow, and predators to secure a single kill that could feed a group for weeks. The cold gnawed at their bones, but hunger gnawed even deeper. Every hunt was a gamble. Risk exposure to frostbite, broken bones, or a predator's ambush, or remain inside the safety of a shelter and starve slowly. The struggle for food defined the Ice Age, and in winter, the struggle became a constant war. Hunting in the dark was not a choice, but a necessity. Short daylight hours meant hunters had little time, and sometimes the best chances for a kill came at dawn, dusk, or even in the dead of night. Firelit torches and glowing embers guided their steps through snow-covered forests or across icy plains. The silence of the night was broken only by the crunch of snow beneath their feet and the howl of distant wolves. In such moments, cavemen carried not only spears and stone blades, but also the weight of their family survival. Every step forward was driven by hunger, by the memory of children huddled near dying embers, waiting for food that might not come. The prey they sought was as dangerous as it was necessary. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, reindeer, and bison roamed the frozen landscapes. These creatures carried with them the promise of life. Meat to eat, hides to warm the body, bones to build tools and shelters. But they were no easy targets. A single mammoth could crush hunters under its massive weight, while a cornered bison could gore men with its horns. Hunters had to move as a unit, their movements rehearsed through countless trials. They used strategy, communication, and knowledge of animal behavior. Some herds were driven toward natural traps like cliffs or swamps. Others were surrounded with fire and noise to confuse them. Success was rare, but when achieved, it meant life for weeks. Failure, however, could mean death in hours. The cold itself was an enemy. Weapons slipped from frostbitten fingers, and snow blinded their vision. Hunters wrapped themselves in animal hides, but movement through deep snow drained their energy quickly. Each breath burned in their lungs, and each pause threatened to stiffen their muscles. Predators like wolves, saber-toothed cats, and cave lions followed their movements, waiting for the moment when humans were distracted or weakened. A hunter who fell behind could become prey himself. The Ice Age night was not empty. It was alive with eyes watching from the shadows. Yet despite these dangers, humans found ways to master their hunts. Stone-tipped spears, atlatl spear throwers, and eventually bows gave them range and precision. They lit fires to startle herds and to mark paths home. They learned to track animals by their footprints in snow, reading the ground as though it were a map written by nature itself. They moved silently, understanding the wind, so their scent would not betray them. These skills were not taught in words, but passed through demonstration and repetition, from one generation to the next. To hunt in the dark was not simply to find food. It was to inherit the wisdom of ancestors who had survived countless winters before. When a kill was made, the struggle did not end. Butchering a massive animal in the freezing night was a race against time. Blood could freeze before it was fully drained, and predators were drawn by the smell of fresh meat. Fires were lit quickly to keep hands from freezing, and every part of the animal was used. The hide became clothing or shelter, the bones tools and weapons, the sinews cords and bindings. Nothing was wasted, for waste meant weakness, and weakness meant death. The kill was not just a victory over the animal. It was a victory over the cold itself, a statement that humans could still endure in a world designed to erase them. Sharing the kill was as important as making it. A single hunter could not consume a mammoth, nor could he carry it home alone. Food was divided among families, strengthening bonds within the tribe. Around the fire, meat roasted on stones while the hunters recounted their battle in the snow. These meals were not only nourishment for the body, but fuel for the spirit. They were celebrations of survival, reminders that even in the bleakest nights, life could still be wrestled from the frozen earth. But there were darker moments too. When hunts failed and food ran out, starvation gnawed at the tribe. Some nights ended with empty hands and heavier despair. Bones show evidence that in the most desperate times, groups may have turned to scavenging the remains of animals killed by predators, or even, in extreme cases, cannibalism. Such acts were not taken lightly, but revealed the raw edge of survival. In a world of endless winter, morality often bent to necessity, and the fight for life overshadowed all else. The contrast between the warmth of a feast and the emptiness of hunger defined caveman existence. One day, a successful hunt meant firelight, laughter, and full bellies. The next, failure meant silence, weakness, and fear. Hunting in the dark was more than a physical act. It was a psychological battle against despair. Each hunt carried the question, would the tribe see another sunrise? Would the children survive the winter? In this struggle, every successful hunt became not just food on the fire, but proof that humanity could endure the cold, the predators, and the darkness. Through these struggles, humans developed resilience unmatched by other creatures. They were not the strongest or fastest predators in the Ice Age, but they were the most determined. Their cooperation, ingenuity, and willingness to face the darkness gave them a unique advantage. Hunting in the dark, with torches and spears, was a declaration of defiance. Against the howling wind, the endless night, and the teeth of predators, humans carve out their survival with courage and firelight. On the longest night of the year, when the cold was sharpest and the world seemed designed to end them, cavemen went into the darkness not as victims, but as hunters. Every step across the snow, every breath clouding in the air, every spear raised against the shadows was a story of persistence. Food was never guaranteed, but the will to pursue it never faded. This relentless drive to seek life in the heart of darkness is what allowed our ancestors to endure, and ultimately, to triumph over the frozen world that tried to silence them. Killing a mammoth, a reindeer, or even a small herd of bison was only half the battle. In the Ice Age winters, survival depended not just on a hunt, but on what came afterward. Preserving the kill and making sure it could sustain the group for as long as possible. The cold world outside was both an enemy and an ally. On one hand, it froze the earth and stripped the land of life. On the other hand, it acted as nature's greatest refrigerator. Cavemen understood this balance well. They knew that wasting food meant starvation, that every bite of meat had to be guarded, stored, and rationed with care. Preserving the kill was not just a practical act. It was a ritual of survival, a way of extending the life of a hunt into the days and nights ahead. When an animal was brought down, time immediately became the hunter's enemy. Meat left in the open air attracted scavengers, wolves, hyenas, even rival tribes. Butchering began almost instantly, often under the glow of firelight, with stone blades slicing through hide and flesh. Bones were cracked open for marrow, rich in fat and energy. The meat was cut into strips, hides removed with care, sinews separated for cordage. Every part of the animal had value, and nothing could be wasted. Once processed, the question became, how to make it last. The Ice Age itself provided one solution. In regions where temperatures plunged far below freezing, carcasses could be stored in snowbanks, caves, or shallow pits lined with ice. The cold preserved the meat naturally, keeping it safe for weeks or even months. Archaeological evidence suggests that groups deliberately buried food in frozen ground, marking the site, so they could return later when hunger pressed hardest. This practice turned the earth into a storehouse, a hidden pantry beneath the snow. But freezing alone was not always enough. Cavemen understood that meat could rot if not handled properly, even in cold weather, and that predators could sniff out hidden caches. Drying and smoking became essential tools. Strips of meat were hung near fires, where smoke kept insects and scavengers away and heat slowly removed moisture. What remained was tough, leathery, but long-lasting. Smoked meat could travel with migrating groups, carried in hide pouches and eaten on journeys across the tundra. Fat, another vital resource, was rendered and stored in hide bags or bone containers. Mixed with dried meat, it created a high-energy food similar to what later cultures would call pemmican. These methods were born from observation and necessity, refined by generations of trial and error. Rationing was as critical as preservation. A successful kill might give illusion of abundance, but wise leaders knew better. They portioned meat carefully, ensuring that no single night of feasting could undo weeks of hunting effort. Children, elders, and the weak were given priority, for the survival of the group depended on protecting its most vulnerable. Hunters needed strength, so they too were fed in preparation for the next dangerous pursuit. Decisions about food were not just practical. They were deeply social, binding tribes together through shared sacrifice. Food storage was also a matter of defense. In a world where predators prowled constantly, caches had to be hidden or guarded. Wolves could dig through snow. Bears could sniff out buried meat from miles away. Rival human groups posed an even greater threat, raiding food supplies in desperate times. To prevent this, cavemen often stored food in multiple places, spreading their resources so that no single loss would doom the entire tribe. Guarding food became as important as guarding fire, and disputes over stolen meat could erupt into deadly conflicts. Preservation shaped the rhythm of winter life. On nights when hunting was impossible, when storms raged or snow blocked paths, the tribe turned to its stores. A strip of dried meat, a handful of marrow, or a stew made from bones could mean the difference between strength and weakness. The fire became the stage for rationing, as leaders distributed food and families ate in silence or gratitude. Each bite carried memory, the danger of the hunt, the teamwork that brought the animal down, the life given so that others might live. Psychologically, preservation offered hope. Knowing that food was stored, hidden beneath snow or hanging in the smoke-darkened air, gave comfort in the darkest nights. It meant tomorrow could still hold life. Without preservation, hunger would haunt every waking moment, driving people into desperation. With it, there was a sense of control, however fragile, over a world of chaos. The tribe could look beyond today, imagining survival into the next moon, the next thaw, the next spring. Yet even with preservation, starvation always lurked at the edges. Sometimes caches were found by predators, or meat spoiled despite efforts to save it. Sometimes the group simply underestimated the length of the winter night. Skeletons unearthed from Ice Age sites tell stories of malnutrition and famine. Ribs show signs of children suffering from hunger. Bones reveal the struggle of adults weakened by lack of protein. The act of preserving food was never foolproof. It was always a gamble against time, nature, and chance. But without it, humanity would not have survived. Preservation and rationing were acts of foresight, born from intelligence and necessity. They transformed the hunt from a fleeting victory into a lasting source of life. More than that, they created patterns of cooperation, forcing tribes to plan, share, and think beyond the immediate moment. The mammoth bone huts of the tundra, the smoke-filled caves of Europe, the frozen storage pits of the steppe. All were monuments to this survival strategy. On the longest night of the year, as snow pressed against shelters and fire crackled low, the preserved kill became the tribe's salvation. Strips of smoked meat warmed on stones, marrow boiled into broth, fat melted into nourishing fuel. Outside, the world was silent and deadly. Inside, the taste of preserved food was the taste of endurance. Every preserved bite was more than nutrition. It was memory of the hunt, a promise of tomorrow, and proof that even in a frozen, merciless world, humans had found ways not just to endure, but to outwit the darkness. In the Ice Age world, bare skin meant certain death. The cold was relentless, gnawing at flesh until it stiffened, darkened, and froze. Unlike animals with thick coats of fur or layers of fat, humans were fragile in the face of sub-zero winds. To survive, cavemen had to borrow the warmth of the beasts they hunted. The hides and furs of mammoths, reindeer, bison, and wolves became their second skin, the barrier that separated life from frostbite. Clothing was not luxury. It was armor against the night, as essential as fire and shelter. And yet, clothing was more than practical protection. It was a symbol of ingenuity, a testament to human creativity, and one of the earliest steps toward culture itself. When an animal was killed, its hide was carefully stripped from the carcass. This process was delicate, requiring stone scrapers to remove flesh and fat while preserving the strength of the skin. Fresh hides were stiff and heavy, difficult to wrap around the body. But with time, cavemen learned to soften and treat them. They rubbed animal brains, fat, and marrow into the hides, stretching and smoking them until they became supple. This primitive tanning process transformed rough skin into usable clothing material. The first side was often left intact for warmth, while inner linings were smooth for comfort. From these hides, early garments were fashioned. Simple at first, but growing more refined with each generation. At the beginning, clothing was little more than draped hides, tied with sinew or fastened with bone pins. But necessity drove innovation. The freezing winds demanded garments that fit snugly and protected vulnerable parts of body, hands, feet, heads. Thus came the invention of sewing. Archaeologists have discovered some of the earliest sewing needles carved from bone and ivory, dating back tens of thousands of years. With these tools, cavemen pierced hides and stitched them together using animal sinew as thread. The result was tailored clothing, tunics, leggings, boots, and hoods that wrapped the body completely in warmth. For the first time, clothing became crafted, shaped to human form, designed for both survival and movement. Furs and hides were not all the same. Each animal provided a unique kind of protection. Mammoth hides, thick and durable, were used for outer layers and shelter coverings. Reindeer hides, lighter and flexible, made excellent boots and cloaks. Wolf and fox furs, soft and insulating, became hoods and collars. Even bird feathers were sometimes tied into garments for added insulation. Cavemen studied the natural world closely, learning which materials best protected against snow, wind, or moisture. Their wardrobes were not random, but carefully chosen survival systems, adapted to the landscapes they inhabited. Clothing also carried meaning beyond mere warmth. To wear the fur of a predator, such as a wolf or cave lion, was to embody its strength and spirit. Shamans and hunters often dressed in skins with the head still attached, believing they could channel the power of the animal in hunts or rituals. Decorated garments, beads made from shells, teeth, and bones, suggest that clothing was also a canvas for identity and symbolism. What began as survival soon became expression, a way to distinguish tribes, families, or roles within the group. Clothing transformed humans not only physically but socially, marking beginnings of style and status. The making of clothes was often a communal task, and it was here that women played a central role in survival. While men hunted, women softened hides, prepared sinews, and sewed garments. The skill of sewing was no less vital than the aim of a spear. Without well-made clothing, hunters could not venture into the snow, children could not survive the freezing nights, and the elderly would perish quickly. In this way, the craft of clothing was an act of guardianship, keeping the entire group alive. Every stitch carried weight, binding together not only hides but the very future of the tribe. Clothing extended the range of human existence. With well-made garments, groups could move into colder climates, explore higher elevations, and hunt in harsher conditions. Wrapped in layers of hide and fur, they pushed further north and deeper into icy territories where other creatures dared not dwell. Clothing gave humans freedom from the strict limit of biology, transforming them into adaptable beings who could thrive in environments no naked creature could endure. This innovation was a turning point in human history, a leap that allowed migration, expansion, and ultimately survival in the harshest of worlds. But clothing was not indestructible. Wet hides could freeze solid, turning garments into rigid shells. Poorly sewn seams let in drafts, chilling the skin beneath. Constant repairs were needed, boots patched, cloaks restitched, hoods reinforced. Fire and smoke helped to dry and maintain garments, but accidents could strip a person of their protection. To lose one's clothing in the depths of winter was as dangerous as losing fire or shelter. It meant vulnerability, exposure, and likely death. Thus, garments were guarded with as much care as food or weapons. Over time, clothing became part of the rhythm of survival. At night, garments were removed and hung near the fire to dry. In the morning, furs were tied tight, boots strapped on, hoods pulled low. Children were wrapped in layered hides, swaddled in warmth before being carried outside. The daily ritual of clothing the body became as natural as breathing, yet its importance was never taken for granted. Each layer was a shield, each stitch a safeguard, each piece of fur a promise of another day alive. On the longest night of the year, when snow fell thick and winds roared like spirits outside the shelter, clothing became the tribe's silent protector. Wrapped in furs, people lay close together, their breath mingling in the firelit dark. Outside, the storm raged, tearing at the world with icy claws. But inside, beneath mammoth hides and wolf pelts, humans endured. Their survival was stitched together from bone needles, sinew threads, and the skins of beasts. It was a triumph of adaptation, proof that even in a world designed to freeze them into extinction, they could craft a shield from nature itself. Clothing was more than warmth. It was the first human invention to transform the body, to turn fragility into resilience. In every stitch, in every draped hide, lay the story of humanity's determination. Fire gave them light, shelter gave them walls, but clothing gave them mobility, the ability to step into the snow and face the endless night. Without it, the Ice Age would have swallowed humanity whole. With it, they became wanderers, hunters, and survivors, wrapped in the strength of the animals they had conquered. In the heart of the Ice Age, survival was a daily test of creativity. Humans were not the strongest animals on the tundra, nor the fastest, nor the most naturally protected. But they possessed something far greater. Minds capable of transforming ordinary objects into extraordinary tools. A shard of stone became a blade sharper than a predator's fang. A broken bone became a needle, a harpoon, or a hammer. Antlers turned into picks, ivory into figurines, wood into spears. Every tool was a bridge between weakness and strength, between exposure and endurance. The world itself was a workshop, and ingenuity was the key to turning raw nature into the instruments of survival. Stone was a foundation. Long before metal, cavemen mastered the art of shaping rocks into cutting edges. Flint, obsidian, and chert were prized for their ability to fracture cleanly, creating razor-sharp surfaces. Through flaking and striking techniques, hunters crafted hand axes, scrapers, and spear points. Archaeological sites reveal that these tools were not crude, but carefully designed for specific purposes. Scrapers prepared hides, blades sliced meat, and points armed hunting weapons. With each strike of stone against stone, humans sharpened their advantage in a world of predators. Fire may have provided warmth, but stone gave them power. Bone and antler extended this power further. The remains of animals were not simply discarded. They were transformed. Long bones became digging sticks, awls, and handles. Ribs could be shaped into sled runners or shovels. Antlers, with their natural strength, became hammers or barbed points for fishing spears. The ingenuity of these transformations reveals a mind that saw not only what material was, but what it could be. A mammoth's rib was no longer just part of skeleton. It could become part of a human survival kit. In this way, death fed life not only through meat, but through tools. The spear was among the greatest achievements of this era. At first, it was a simple sharpened stick hardened in fire, thrust by hand. But over time, technology advanced. Stone points were attached with sinew and resin, increasing lethality. Then came the atlatl, a spear thrower carved from wood or bone that extended the human arm, hurling projectiles with far greater speed and force. With this innovation, hunters could strike from a safer distance, tipping the scales against massive beasts like mammoths and bison. Later still came the bow, though its widespread use came much later in human prehistory. Each new weapon was not just an invention. It was an adaptation, a response to the eternal challenge of survival. Smaller tools were just as vital. Bone needles allowed hides to be sewn into tailored clothing, ensuring protection against the cold. Stone scrapers made this work possible, smoothing skins and cutting sinew threads. Fire drilling tools created sparks in damp conditions, guaranteeing warmth even after storms. Every tool represented both necessity and foresight. Without them, daily life would have been impossible. With them, survival became not just possible but sustainable. The making of tools was itself a ritual of knowledge. Skills were passed down through demonstration, an elder striking flint, a child watching closely, a teenager repeating the movement until the right flake broke free. These were not written lessons but embodied wisdom, stored in memory and muscle. The rhythm of tool-making echoed through shelters and caves. The sound of stone striking stone as essential to survival as the crackle of fire. Tools were more than objects. They were extensions of human hands, vessels of ancestral knowledge carried into each new generation. Tools also revealed social cooperation. Some individuals specialized in crafting, their skill recognized within the tribe. A well-made spear point could mean the difference between a successful hunt and a wasted effort. In this way, toolmakers held a vital role, their work woven into the survival of all. The act of sharing tools, teaching techniques, and distributing resources reinforced bonds of community. No single person could master everything, but together, through shared ingenuity, they created a collective arsenal against the cold. Beyond survival, tools marked the first sparks of creativity. Some were decorated, carved with patterns or symbols. Ivory figurines and beads suggest that even in the harshest conditions, humans had the time and desire to create beauty. A tool could be both functional and symbolic, serving as a knife, a charm, or a marker of identity. This blend of utility and artistry shows the dual nature of humanity, practical yet imaginative, focused on survival yet dreaming of more. The consequences of tools were profound. With them, humans were no longer bound by their natural weaknesses. They could cut meat more efficiently than predators, build shelters stronger than nests or burrows, defend themselves against animals many times their size. They turned bone, stone, and wood into equalizers, leveling the playing field against a hostile world. Every tool was a declaration. We will not be prey, we will endure. Yet tools were fragile. Stone points shattered, bone needles broke, spears splintered. Maintaining them required constant work, resharpening, repairing, remaking. This cycle of creation and renewal mirrored the cycle of survival itself. Just as food had to be hunted and fire had to be fed, tools had to be remade endlessly. They were both salvation and burden, a reminder that survival was not a single victory but a daily struggle. On the longest night of the year, when the fire burned low and hunger pressed hard, tools lay scattered around the shelter. Spear points ready, scrapers at hand, needles waiting to mend torn clothing. Each object carried the memory of hands that had shaped it, of lives that had depended on it. They were silent companions, lifeless yet essential, born from ingenuity and driven by necessity. In those tools, humanity found not only survival but identity, the first steps toward mastery of the world. Tools were the true inheritance of the caveman, passed not in blood alone but in knowledge, skill, and craft. They were the proof that humans were not passive victims of the Ice Age, but active shapers of their destiny. In stone and bone, we carved the path that led from fragile shelters in frozen valleys to the dawn of civilization itself. Fire was more than a discovery. It was a revolution, the eternal guardian that transformed the fate of humankind. In the frozen wilderness of the Ice Age, where darkness stretched for endless hours and predators prowled unseen, fire became a shield, a weapon, and a companion. It was not just warmth against the bitter cold, but light in a world of shadows, protection against beasts, and a tool that extended human power far beyond the limits of flesh and bone. Without fire, survival would have been fragile and fleeting. With fire, humanity claimed mastery over an unforgiving environment. The earliest encounters with fire were likely accidental. Lightning strikes igniting dry grass, volcanic eruptions, or smoldering embers left by forest fires would have introduced cavemen to its mystery. At first, fire was terrifying, a force that consumed everything in its path, unpredictable and wild. But curiosity overcame fear. The flames were not just destructive, they were mesmerizing, alive, breathing, and dancing. Humans soon learned that fire could be tamed, preserved, and eventually created. This shift was monumental, for it meant that they no longer had to depend on nature's accidents. Fire was theirs to command. Warmth was the most immediate gift. In icy climates where temperatures could plummet to unbearable extremes, fire provided life-saving heat. Around the flames, families huddled together, their bodies soaking in comfort that no fur or shelter alone could provide. The difference between a freezing night and a survivable one was measured by the strength of the fire. It allowed humans to push deeper into colder regions, expanding their territory beyond what their bodies could naturally endure. Fire stretched the boundaries of possibility, turning deadly nights into manageable ones. Equally vital was light. Before fire, nightfall meant blindness and enforced submission to darkness. The glow of the flames pierced the shadows, revealing faces, tools, and the boundaries of the shelter. Light brought safety, allowing humans to remain active after dusk, to work, to talk, to tell stories. It turned night into a shared experience rather than a time of silent fear. Firelight also gave birth to ritual and imagination. Flickering shadows on cave walls became canvases for storytelling, for myth, for the first sparks of human culture. In the glow of fire, the human mind expanded, no longer confined by the limits of daylight. Fire was also a formidable protector. Predators feared flames. The crackle and smoke drove back wolves, lions, and other hunters of the dark. A ring of fire around a camp turned vulnerability into strength. For the first time, humans were not helpless prey in the nocturnal world. Fire declared their presence boldly. Here we are, and here we will remain. The security it offered was psychological as much as physical. Around the fire, there was confidence, a sense of control, a reassurance that danger could be held at bay. Cooking was perhaps the most transformative use of fire. Raw meat, tough and sometimes dangerous, became tender, safer, and more nourishing when exposed to flames. Fire unlocked calories hidden in otherwise inedible foods, breaking down fibers and releasing energy that fueled the growth of the human brain. The ability to cook may have been as important as any tool in shaping human evolution. A roasted meal was more than food. It was survival enhanced, intelligence sharpened, and community strengthened. Sharing cooked food reinforced bonds, turning meals into rituals of unity. Beyond necessity, fire carried symbolism. It was a living presence, demanding care and attention. Fires had to be fed, guarded, and kept alive through the night. Losing a flame could mean disaster. forcing a group to travel miles to find embers or sparks again. Thus, fire became sacred, entrusted to those who would watch over it faithfully. In many cultures, even tens of thousands of years later, fire remained a symbol of life, purity, and spirit. In its glow, humans saw not just heat and light, but something eternal, something beyond themselves. The mastery of creating fire through friction, sparks from flint, or the bow drill, marked one of humanity's greatest achievements. No longer dependent on luck, cavemen could summon flame at will. This was true power, to generate warmth, protection, and nourishment from nothing but skill and knowledge. The ability to kindle fire on demand was a dividing line between those who merely endured and those who thrived. Around the fire, community found its heart. It was the center of the camp, the place where people gathered, where voices rose in conversation, where elders told stories and children listened wide-eyed. Fire turned survival into culture. It was here that traditions were passed down, myths were born, and the first sense of shared identity emerged. The fire was not just physical, it was social, emotional, and spiritual. In its light, humanity became more than individuals struggling alone. It became a people united by shared flame. Yet fire was never without danger. Carelessness could turn salvation into catastrophe. A stray spark could ignite dry grass. A tipped torch could consume a shelter. Fire demanded respect, an acknowledgement of its dual nature as both giver and taker of life. The caveman understood this balance, treating flames with reverence. In many ways, fire mirrored humanity itself, capable of creation, destruction, and transformation. As the Ice Age wore on, fire remained constant, an anchor in a shifting world. When the winds howled and snow fell heavy, fire burned steady. When mammoths roamed and predators prowled, fire stood as a barrier. When fear threatened to overwhelm, fire offered courage. It was more than an element. It was a companion, the eternal guardian that followed humanity into every new frontier. Fire defined the human journey. It made survival possible, imagination flourish, and culture take root. In its glow, humanity took its first steps toward civilization. The flames that once danced in caves and shelters still burn in every hearth and every spark of progress. Fire was not only a guardian of the past. It was a light that carried humanity into the future. In the unforgiving world of the Ice Age, no single caveman could have survived alone for long. The cold was too harsh, the predators too cunning, and the demands of daily survival too great for one set of hands. Community was not a luxury. It was a foundation of existence. In groups, humans found strength, safety, and resilience. Cooperation became the invisible glue that bound them together, turning fragile individuals into powerful collectives. Where one person faltered, another could support. Where one set of eyes closed in sleep, others could keep watch. This web of shared effort was what transformed survival into a possibility, even in the deadliest winters. At the heart of community was the family unit. Parents, children, and sometimes extended relatives formed the smallest circle of survival. Families provided the emotional backbone of early life. A child was not simply born into existence. They were born into a group that would nurture, protect, and teach. In this, family served as a first school of survival. Children learned to mimic adults, watching how they struck flint, skinned animals, or read the signs of the weather. Grandparents, often no longer fit for the physical demands of hunting, became repositories of wisdom. Their stories, experiences, and instructions guided the young, ensuring that each new generation did not have to start from scratch. Beyond the family, larger bands of 20 to 40 individuals often roamed together. These groups offered greater security against predators and rivals. Within such bands, roles naturally emerged. Some excelled at hunting, others at crafting tools, while others had sharp memories for seasonal cycles or migration paths. The division of labor was not rigid but flexible, ensuring that each person contributed according to their strengths. This cooperative model allowed groups to balance effort and reward, minimizing risks and maximizing survival chances. Hunting, especially in winter, highlighted the necessity of cooperation. Large animals like mammoths, bison, or reindeer could never have been brought down by a single individual armed only with primitive tools. Success demanded coordination. Scouts to track herds, runners to drive the prey, hunters to strike, and carriers to bring meat back to camp. Each role was vital, and without trust, the hunt would fail. This was a stark contrast between life and death. A fractured group went hungry, a united one feasted. After successful kill, meat was shared widely. Distribution was not just charity. It was insurance. Those who gave today could expect to receive tomorrow when fortunes reversed. In winter especially, sharing became a lifeline. A fire that burned in one shelter could spread warmth to all. Furs, food, and tools often passed from one set of hands to another, reinforcing bonds of reciprocity. To hoard in times of scarcity risked alienation from the group, and isolation was a near certain death sentence. Thus, generosity became a survival strategy, ingrained not just as morality but as necessity. It was in these exchanges that early humans built the foundations of empathy, compassion, and social trust. Language, or at least complex communication, played a crucial role in deepening cooperation. Whether through spoken words, hand signals, or shared rituals, communication allowed groups to coordinate hunts, warn danger, or teach survival strategies. Around the fire, stories became more than entertainment. They were lessons encoded in narrative form. Tales of past winters, heroic hunts, or tragic mistakes guided decisions in the present. These shared stories created a sense of identity, binding individuals into something larger than themselves. They were no longer just a band of people. They were a people defined by memory, struggle, and shared destiny. Cooperation also extended to defense. In the dark months of winter, predators pressed closer to human camps, drawn by the scent of meat and the warmth of fire. Wolves, cave lions, and even rival human groups posed constant threats. Alone, an individual could be quickly overwhelmed. But in numbers, cavemen created walls of spears, shouts, and fire. Defense was collective, and in defending one another, they defended themselves. Trust in these moments was absolute. Hesitation could mean not only personal danger, but disaster for the entire band. Rituals reinforced unity. Seasonal gatherings, burial ceremonies, or symbolic gestures around the fire gave shape to shared values. Even in scarcity, rituals were maintained, for they bound the community together spiritually as well as physically. A group that prayed, chanted, or painted together was not just surviving, it was creating meaning out of survival. These practices strengthened bonds, reduced fear, and reminded each member that they were part of something enduring. Conflict, of course, was inevitable. Resources were scarce, tempers short, and rivalries real. But even here, cooperation provided solutions. Disputes might be settled by elders, avoided through separation, or resolved through compromise. The recognition that unity outweighed division often guided decisions. A fractured group could not withstand winter. Survival demanded that differences be managed, if not erased. The psychology of community was as important as the practical benefits. Isolation bred despair, but belonging fostered hope. To sit in the circle of firelight, to hear familiar voices, to share in food and laughter even during hardship. These moments nourished the spirit as much as the body. The caveman understood instinctively what modern psychology confirms. Human beings are wired for connection. It was in connection that they found resilience, courage, and the strength to face the longest nights. Cooperation was not merely a tool of survival. It was a seed of civilization. From small bands working together in icy wildernesses grew tribes, villages, and eventually societies. The lessons learned in those dark winters, that trust must be earned, that generosity strengthens all, that unity triumphs over division, would echo throughout human history. Cavemen did not survive the cold alone. They survived together, hand in hand, voice with voice, bound by bonds stronger than the fiercest storm. In the end, community was a fire within the fire. Just as flames provided light and warmth, the bonds of cooperation provided hope and endurance. The caveman's greatest weapon against extinction was not muscle, tool, or even fire. It was each other. Together. They endured, and together they built the first fragile foundations of what will become humanity's long and extraordinary story. Winter did not only bring the merciless cold, it also sharpened the hunger of predators. Cavemen were not the only creatures struggling to survive the endless nights of the Ice Age. Wolves, cave lion, hyenas, and even bears roamed the frozen landscapes, their senses keen and their appetites desperate. To the caveman, every step beyond the safety of firelight meant entering a world where he was not always a hunter, but often the hunted. The predator's shadow was constant, stretching across every camp, every journey, and every hunt. Survival meant not only braving the cold, but also outsmarting those who lurked in the darkness. Among the most persistent threats were wolves. Agile, intelligent, and highly social, wolves hunted in packs with strategies that mirrored human cooperation. In winter, when prey grew scarce, wolves prowled closer to human settlements, drawn by the scent of food and the flicker of fire. A lone caveman traveling through the snow was vulnerable. Even a small pack could overwhelm him. Yet wolves were also teachers. Watching them hunt may have inspired humans to adopt similar strategies of coordination and endurance. Over generations, a cautious relationship formed. Sometimes predator and prey, other times uneasy companions. It was from these shadows that the first steps toward domestication would eventually emerge, transforming wolves from threats into allies. The cave lion was another predator that haunted the imagination of early humans. Larger and more powerful than modern lions, these beasts could strike with terrifying speed and strength. A cave lion needed only one mistake, a hunter straying too far, a child left unguarded, to devastate an entire group. In deep winter, when prey animals migrated south or perished in snowstorms, lions sometimes prowled dangerously close to human shelters, leaving claw marks and roars in the night as grim reminders of their presence. For cavemen, the cave lion became both a physical threat and a symbolic embodiment of fear. Its strength demanded respect. Its presence inspired myths, and its image often appeared in cave art as both warning and worship. Hyenas and other scavengers added to the constant tension. They followed the trails of both predators and humans, waiting for an opportunity to snatch food or strike at weakness. Their laughter-like calls in the darkness unnerved even the bravest hunters. A group returning with fresh meat from a mammoth hunt might find themselves stalked, harassed, and surrounded until they reached the safety of fire. Even when the hyenas did not attack directly, their persistence drained energy, forced vigilance, and reminded humans that every success carried the risk of being stolen. Bears, particularly cave bears, were formidable opponents. These massive creatures were not always aggressive, but could be deadly when provoked or when food was scarce. During harsh winters, some bears emerged early from hibernation or fought fiercely for dens that humans also sought as shelter. To enter a cave without caution was to risk confrontation with a beast capable of ending lives in moments. Such encounters were seared into memory and retold in stories around the fire, warnings for the next generation. Predators shaped human behavior in countless ways. Hunting strategies often accounted for the possibility of being ambushed. Camps were chosen carefully, placed near defensible terrain, and always circled by firelight. Night watches were organized, ensuring that someone remained awake to listen for rustling, growls, or the snap of a twig. Spears, stones, and firebrands were kept within reach. Children were taught from an early age to stay close to the group, never wandering into the shadows. The predator's presence was not an occasional threat. It was the backdrop of existence. Yet predators also provided a strange kind of balance. By forcing vigilance, they sharpened human senses. By demanding cooperation in defense, they strengthened bonds within the group. Even in their danger, predators contributed to human evolution, shaping the development of intelligence, strategy, and courage. The predator's shadow may have brought fear, but it also brought growth. The constant reminder that death was only a step away pushed humans to adapt, to innovate, and to endure. Some groups began to use the predator's own strengths against them, just as wolves hunted in packs. Humans learned to form hunting parties that mirrored this organization. They studied patterns of predator behavior, noting when lions rested, when wolves traveled, and when scavengers circled. They laid traps, set ambushes, and used fire not only as protection but as a weapon. Smoke, noise, and coordinated movements could drive predators back, turning the hunters into the hunted. Each victory over a predator was not just survival, but a triumph of mind over muscle, intelligence over instinct. Predators also carved deep impressions into the spiritual lives of cavemen. They were feared but also revered. To paint a lion on a cave wall or carve a wolf into bone was to acknowledge its power, to respect its spirit, and perhaps to seek some share of its strength. Rituals may have honored the animals, blending fear with admiration. In these acts, predators were transformed from mere dangers into symbols, woven into the mythology that gave meaning to human struggle. Still, the predator's shadow never truly lifted. Even in moments of safety, around the fire, with bellies full, the howl of wolves or the echo of a lion's roar could pierce the night, a reminder that danger waited just beyond the circle of light. This constant tension shaped the psychology of early humans, instilling both caution and resilience. To live under the gaze of predators was to live in a state of readiness, where fear was not paralyzing but motivating. It pushed humans to build stronger shelters, craft better weapons, and ultimately to dominate the food chain. In the end, predators were both enemy and teacher. They threatened the caveman's existence but also refined it. The struggle against them forged courage, cooperation, and ingenuity. The predator's shadow stretched long across human history, but it did not extinguish the flame of survival. Instead, it made that flame burn brighter. Where wolves howled, where lions roared, and where hyenas laughed in the darkness, humanity learned to stand together, to face fear, and to carve a path forward in a world that constantly tested their will to endure. For the caveman, survival was not a matter of staying still. The Ice Age demanded movement, endless movement, a restless pursuit of life across frozen plains and rugged mountains. Winter forced decisions that shaped entire communities: remain and risk starvation, or move and risk the dangers of unknown lands. Migration was not a choice born of adventure, but of necessity. Food, water, and shelter determined the rhythm of life, and when the land grew barren, the only path forward was the one that stretched into the distance. These migrations were long, arduous, and perilous, yet they were the very journeys that ensured humanity's survival and expansion. Central to migration was the pursuit of animals. Large herds, mammoths, reindeer, bison, aurochs, were the lifeblood of Ice Age communities. These creatures provided not only meat but also furs, bones, and sinews essential for tools, clothing, and shelter. But herds moved with the seasons, traveling hundreds of miles to find grazing grounds untouched by snow. Cavemen, relying on their prey, had little choice but to follow. To track the herds was to follow survival itself. This pursuit carved pathways across continents, carrying humans through valleys, forests, and icy tundra in search of sustenance. The act of migration tested every aspect of human endurance. Families traveled together, carrying what little they owned: stone tools, precious fire-starting kits, scraps of fur, and perhaps dried meat. Children were carried on backs or dragged on simple sleds fashioned from wood and bone. Elders, though slower, were valued for their wisdom, guiding routes based on memory of past journeys. Each step was weighted with the knowledge that failure meant death, but hope lay in the promise of fertile lands ahead. The environment offered no mercy. Blizzards could blind and bury travelers in moments. Rivers, frozen on the surface, sometimes cracked beneath the weight of those crossing. Mountains loomed with cliffs that tested strength and courage. In such journeys, cooperation was more vital than ever. Groups learned to rotate burdens, to share warmth, and scout ahead for dangers. Fire was guarded with vigilance. Embers carried in bark or bone to ensure flames never died. For every mile crossed, survival hinged on collective determination. Yet migration was not only about following prey, it was also about escaping the grip of cold. When glaciers advanced and temperatures plummeted, humans were forced to abandon familiar territories. Valleys that once provided shelter became uninhabitable, forcing groups into uncertain lands. These movements were not temporary but transformative, carrying humans into new regions, introducing them to unfamiliar landscapes, and sparking encounters with rival groups. In this way, winter migration shaped not only survival, but also the spread of humanity across the globe. Encounters with other bands during migration could bring opportunity or conflict. Shared fires, food, and knowledge sometimes forged bonds that lasted generations. A meeting between groups might mean exchanging hunting techniques, tools, or stories of new lands. Survival in the Ice Age was never only physical. It was also deeply spiritual. The caveman did not view winter merely as a season, but as a force, an enemy, a test, and sometimes even a spirit that had to be endured or appeased. In the endless dark of the coldest nights, when death lingered close and hunger gnawed at every stomach, rituals offered meaning, comfort, and strength. These traditions, songs, chants, burials, and symbolic acts, were more than superstition. They were survival tools of the mind, helping humans face fear, cope with loss, and hold communities together through the harshest trials. Winter rituals often centered around fire. Fire was life, and to keep it burning through the night became more than practical. It was sacred. Some groups may have treated the flame as a spirit that demanded care, feeding it wood as though nourishing a living being. Before a hunt, embers might be touched or ashes rubbed onto the body as a blessing. When fire sputtered, prayers or chants were offered, pleading for the light not to die. The fire circle became a spiritual boundary, separating the world of the living from the unknown shadows beyond. Burial practices reveal how early humans connected survival with belief. The dead were not discarded but laid to rest with care. Bodies were often placed in caves, sometimes covered with ochre or decorated with beads, shells, or animal bones. Tools, weapons, and food were buried alongside them, suggesting a belief in a journey beyond death. In the coldest winters, when death claimed the weak or the old, burials became both practical, removing bodies from camp, and ceremonial, reaffirming the group's bond with ancestors. The act of burial was a statement. Even in death, the individual remained part of the community. Winter, with its long darkness, lent itself to ritual storytelling. Around the fire, myths explained the forces of nature. Why the sun vanished, why snow fell, why animals migrated. These stories gave shape to fear, turning chaos into narrative. A storm was not random. It was the anger of a spirit. The return of the sun after the solstice was not coincidence. It was a triumph of light over darkness. By giving meaning to natural cycles, humans found reassurance. The longest night was not endless. It was part of the story, and like every story, it had an ending. Some rituals were seasonal, tied directly to winter survival. Communities may have marked the solstice with symbolic acts. Songs to call back the sun, dances to celebrate endurance, or offerings to unseen forces. Animal bones from hunts might be placed in sacred spots, thanking the spirit of the prey for its sacrifice. These acts reinforce respect for nature, a reminder that survival depended not only on strength, but also on balance with the world around them. Rituals also served as psychological anchors during hardship. When food was scarce and the nights unbearable, rituals gave structure to despair. A chant repeated in unison, a rhythm beaten on drums, or patterns carved into bone reminded the group that they were not powerless. They were part of a tradition that stretched back to their ancestors, who had also faced winters and endured. These acts, though symbolic, lifted spirits, binding the group with hope. Children learned survival not just through skills, but through rituals. Participation in ceremonies taught them values: respect for fire, reverence for animals, loyalty to the group. Simple acts, like being given a talisman of bone or being included in a chant, reinforce belonging. In this way, rituals became education, transmitting wisdom not as dry instructions but as living tradition. They turned survival techniques into sacred duties, ensuring that each generation carried forward the knowledge of the last. Dreams and visions also played roles in winter belief. In the long nights, sleep was often restless, filled with vivid dreams shaped by hunger and fear. Shamans or spiritual figures interpreted these dreams, treating them as messages from spirits or ancestors. A dream of a successful hunt might be seen as an omen to set out the next morning. A dream of predators might be a warning to strengthen defenses. In this way, the unconscious mind became part of survival strategy, channeled through ritual and interpretation. The cave itself often became a sacred place. Caves provided shelter, but they were also canvases of belief. Paintings of animals, handprints, and symbols etched into stone transformed cold walls into spiritual sanctuaries. Some images may have been hunting magic, attempts to ensure success by capturing prey in art before capturing it in life. Others may have been part of seasonal rituals, connecting the cycle of animals and winter to human fate. These expressions were more than decoration. They were acts of survival through symbolism. Even the act of migration carried ritual weight. Before leaving a camp, groups may have left tokens behind: stone stacked, carvings made, or ashes buried, to honor the spirits of the land they were abandoning. Arrival in a new place might be marked by fire rituals, establishing connection with the territory. These acts created continuity, turning the chaos of constant movement into a meaningful journey. At times of death during migration or winter scarcity, rituals became even more poignant. A small grave dug into frozen ground, a fire lit in memory, or songs sung for the departed kept grief from overwhelming the living. By framing loss as part of a greater cycle, communities were able to keep moving, to keep enduring. In this way, rituals serve as emotional survival, just as critical as food or fire. The contrast between physical struggle and spiritual resilience was sharp. Bodies suffered from cold and hunger, but spirits were nourished by ritual. Where survival tested the flesh, ritual fortified the mind. This balance was crucial, for despair could be as deadly as starvation. In giving meaning to suffering, rituals kept hope alive, and where hope survived, so too did humanity. The legacy of these winter rituals echoes even today. Modern solstice festivals, fire ceremonies, and traditions of honoring the dead carry faint traces of Ice Age practices. The caveman's chants, offering, and stories were not primitive foolishness. They were the first attempts to make sense of a harsh, mysterious world. They gave courage when fear threatened to consume, and they preserved unity when survival depended on cooperation. In the end, rituals were survival in symbolic form. They transformed the longest, darkest nights into opportunities for meaning. They reminded the caveman that winter was not just a season of suffering, but part of a larger cycle, a trial that could be endured with faith, unity, and respect. In the sacred glow of firelight, surrounded by chants, burials, and traditions, humanity did more than survive. It created culture, belief, and identity. The rituals of survival were the first seeds of spirituality, planted in the frozen soil of the Ice Age. Survival in the Ice Age was never only physical. It was also deeply spiritual. The caveman did not view winter merely as a season, but as a force, an enemy, a test, and sometimes even a spirit that had to be endured or appeased. In the endless dark of the coldest nights, when death lingered close and hunger gnawed at every stomach, rituals offered meaning, comfort, and strength. These traditions, songs, chants, burials, and symbolic acts, were more than superstition. They were survival tools of the mind, helping humans face fear, cope with loss, and hold communities together through the harshest trials. Winter rituals often centered around fire. Fire was life, and to keep it burning through the night became more than practical. It was sacred. Some groups may have treated the flame as a spirit that demanded care, feeding it wood as though nourishing a living being. Before a hunt, embers might be touched or ashes rubbed onto the body as a blessing. When fire sputtered, prayers or chants were offered, pleading for the light not to die. The fire circle became a spiritual boundary, separating the world of the living from the unknown shadows beyond. Burial practices reveal how early humans connected survival with belief. The dead were not discarded, but laid to rest with care. Bodies were often placed in caves, sometimes covered with ochre or decorated with beads, shells, or animal bones. Tools, weapons, and food were buried alongside them, suggesting a belief in a journey beyond death. In the coldest winters, when death claimed the weak or the old, burials became both practical, removing bodies from camp, and ceremonial, reaffirming the group's bond with ancestors. The act of burial was a statement. Even in death, the individual remained part of the community. Winter, with its long darkness, lent itself to ritual storytelling. Around the fire, myths explained the forces of nature. Why the sun vanished, why snow fell, why animals migrated. These stories gave shape to fear, turning chaos into narrative. A storm was not random. It was the anger of a spirit. The return of the sun after the solstice was not coincidence. It was a triumph of light over darkness. By giving meaning to natural cycles, humans found reassurance. The longest night was not endless. It was part of the story, and like every story, it had an ending. Some rituals were seasonal, tied directly to winter survival. Communities may have marked the solstice with symbolic acts. Songs to call back the sun, dances to celebrate endurance, or offerings to unseen forces. Animal bones from hunts might be placed in sacred spots, thanking the spirit of the prey for its sacrifice. These acts reinforce respect for nature, a reminder that survival depended not only on strength, but also on balance with the world around them. Rituals also served as psychological anchors during hardship. When food was scarce and the nights unbearable, rituals gave structure to despair. A chant repeated in unison, a rhythm beaten on drums, or patterns carved into bone reminded the group that they were not powerless. The Ice Age was a time when every sunrise felt uncertain, and every winter night carried the weight of mortality. For the caveman, life was never guaranteed, and death was never distant. The harshest season exposed the thin line separating survival from extinction, yet also taught lessons that echoed through generations. In the face of endless cold, scarce food, and lurking predators, humans discovered not only the fragility of existence, but also the resilience of their spirit. This section explores a delicate balance, showing how the longest night was both a trial of suffering and a teacher of endurance. The ever-present possibility of death shaped every choice. When the temperature dropped and the fire dimmed, when the sound of wolves circled the perimeter of camp, or when a child coughed in the cold, the group was reminded of how little control they held over nature. Death might come from the claws of a predator, the silence of starvation, or simply the cruelty of frost. Yet this very awareness sharpened their instincts and forced them to adapt. By living with death as a constant shadow, They became more inventive, more cooperative, and more determined. Life, in contrast, was celebrated not in grand gestures but in small victories. The successful striking of sparks that ignited a fire meant survival for another night. A hunted deer, dragged back through the snow, meant warmth in the belly and strength in the bones. The birth of a child in the coldest season, though dangerous, was seen as a triumph of life over the elements. These moments of survival were not taken for granted, but treasured deeply. In their fleeting nature, they reminded the group why the struggle was worth enduring. The balance between life and death was not only physical, but psychological. Fear could paralyze, yet it could also sharpen awareness. Hope could uplift, yet it had to be guarded carefully against disappointment. The longest nights often tested mental strength more than physical endurance. A man could have strong arms for hunting, but without belief that tomorrow might bring light, his spirit could collapse. In this way, survival depended as much on inner resilience as on physical resources. This balance also shaped social structures. Communities learned that life could not be preserved through individual strength alone. It required cooperation. When food was shared, when fire was tended collectively, when the old were cared for by the young, the chances of survival increased. To abandon others might save resources in the short term, but in the long run, it weakened the group. Life was strongest when death was confronted together. In this unity, the group found strength that no individual could muster alone. Lessons were also learned from observing nature. The caveman saw how animals balanced survival and death. Herds of bison huddled together against storms, wolves hunted in packs, and even small creatures like hares burrowed deep into the earth to outlast the cold. These behaviors offered examples: cooperation, preparation, and adaptation. At the same time, the sight of predators feeding on the weak or the frozen bodies of animals scattered across plains reminded humans of nature's impartiality. Life and death were not moral judgments, but part of a cycle. This understanding shaped their worldview: to respect life, accept death, and seek balance in between. Spirituality, too, arose from this tension. Death was not seen as the end, but as part of a continuum. The burial of the dead with tools, food, and ornaments suggested that people believed life extended beyond the physical. This belief gave meaning to loss, transforming despair into acceptance. Rituals around death turned grief into collective strength, ensuring that the living carried a memory and spirit of the departed forward. Thus, death became not just an ending but a source of cultural continuity. The longest night of the year, the solstice, embodied this lesson in a symbolic way. It was the point when darkness reached its peak, threatening to erase light completely. Yet it was also the turning point, after which days slowly grew longer, promising renewal. For the caveman, this cycle of darkness and light mirrored the balance of life and death. It taught them patience, resilience, and the certainty that even the deepest night would eventually yield to dawn. This annual rhythm offered reassurance that survival, though difficult, was always possible. In many ways, the struggle between life and death also shaped human creativity. The need to record, to express, to carve symbols into bone or paint images on cave walls was not only an artistic act, but a confrontation with mortality. These creations outlasted individuals, becoming evidence that life could leave a mark even when bodies perished. Art became an answer to death, a defiance of silence, a way of ensuring that the memory of existence would not vanish with the body. The lessons of the Ice Age were harsh but enduring. The caveman learned that survival required preparation, cooperation, and resilience. He learned that death could not be avoided but could be given meaning. He discovered that every small victory in the face of cold and hunger was worth celebrating. These teachings, born in the longest nights, carried forward into foundations of human culture. Even today, we mark the winter solstice, we honor the dead, and we celebrate the return of light, all echoes of the ancient struggle for balance. Ultimately, the balance of life and death was not just about survival in a physical sense. It was about finding meaning in the struggle. By facing the coldest winters and the darkest nights, humans became more than creatures of instinct. They became thinkers, dreamers, storytellers, and believers. Death forced them to confront the limits of existence, but life inspired them to transcend those limits with imagination, ritual, and hope. The caveman's longest night was a crucible in which humanity itself was forged. It was in those endless hours of cold and fear that humans learned the lessons that still guide us today, that life is fragile, death is inevitable, but meaning can be found in the struggle between the two. Out of this balance emerged not only survival, but the roots of human identity, resilience, and culture. The caveman did not simply endure the longest night. He transformed it into a teacher, and its lessons shaped the very essence of what it means to be human.